Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Let the filibustering begin.
Welcome to Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to Filibuster here on the Nerd Party Network, home to Great Shot Kid, Missing Frames, Nerd Up Show and so many other amazing shows. I'm joined today by someone I've wanted on the show for a long time. He's an old school film projectionist. He's the author of the essential book, The Exterior New York City, Discovering the Real New York on Location book. And he's here on the show today. Hello, Dallas King.
Hello, how's it going?
Yeah, not too bad. I'm so glad to have you on. We've crossed paths many a time before, and I think I reached out to you in about December. I was like, I need to get you on the show for something. And what kind of brings us both together today is our mutual love of a movie like Moon and the work of Duncan Jones, and our anticipation for his new movie Mute, which is out on Friday on Netflix.
Oh, absolutely! I can't wait for that one.
Absolutely, it feels like it's been a long time coming.
It has, yeah. Probably about, I think I've been waiting for it ever since he announced it was going to be after Moon. That was when he was going to be doing it, and so it's been about, was it nearly 10 years?
Yeah, something along those lines. I remembered when, I think I went to a Source Code chat with him at a convention. He was like, I think we're probably just going to make this a comic book, and then it just seemed to vanish for a while. Warcraft happened, and then it was like, Netflix are going to make this movie, and only recently we've just got a trailer, so it feels like it's been like the anticipation and hype level for this movie has been kind of ridiculous amongst fans of his work.
Actually, which comic convention was that you went to?
It was Kapow in London.
I went to the same convention.
There you go. It's a ridiculously small world. Were you at his talk about source code on the Saturday?
Did you get the signed poster afterwards?
Yes, I did indeed.
So did I.
See, we really have got the best person for the mission today. So one of those things I just want to kind of get an idea of, obviously you're a fan of his work. What kind of just tell us a little bit about yourself. This is your kind of first time on here. As I've mentioned, you've got a book out. You're an old school film projectionist. No one can doubt your film fan credentials. So do you want to tell people a little about yourself? Your passions or films that you love.
Basically my film passion came from an early age, from seeing the first sort of Star Wars film, and I remember recording them off the telly and watching them back every weekend, and then just sort of reading Empire magazine and sort of doing sort of a couple of courses at university, not part of your main degree, but the ones that you actually found out you enjoyed more than everything else. And then once I finished university, I got a job working as an assistant manager in the Belmont Film House up in Aberdeen, and then became the general manager, and sort of spent around about 13 years there, doing all sorts of things, from shoveling popcorn, tearing tickets, and then projecting as well, which was one of my passions as well. So I've managed to keep that going. Even though I no longer work at the cinema, I still do freelance projection work, just trying to keep it alive, because I think it is something that if you're a cinema, you should project film. That's how I think that you should always do, and that's hopefully something that will carry on for a while as well.
Absolutely. And what's it like kind of projecting a movie that, we all take for granted it's all digital these days? What are the challenges it presents in this kind of climate with the technology sort of being kind of overlooked these days?
Overlooked is probably the biggest challenge, in the fact that for a couple of years at the Belmont they didn't screen any 35mm films, and it was part of my pet project to get them back up and running. It was actually to screen Moon as part of a science talk for a festival. And so the biggest problem is, once that equipment has been out of action for a while, some of the parts and stuff like that are quite difficult to get a hold of. So it's actually basically keeping it running as constantly as possible, just making sure that there's no wear and tear to the projectors and stuff like that, to make sure that you can project whenever you can, because 99% of everything these days is digital, but you will get the odd film which is only available on a 35mm print, and just so you don't limit your film choices in programming in any way, you should be able to try and screen as many different formats as possible.
And then with that, we touched on that you've written a book as well, all about kind of film locations in New York. How did that kind of come about?
Came about from sort of visiting New York the first time and sort of wandering around the city and going, hang on, that kind of looks like from from a movie, and then discovering it was from a movie, and then thinking, well, if I'm like that, surely there's probably other people around who, when visiting New York, would love to know where, certain scenes from Taxi Driver were shot, or Manhattan, or Ghostbusters and stuff like that. So, because everyone would be able to find like the Ghostbusters firehouse, but there'd be other places that people would want to do, and so it sort of built up from that, and then I sort of went back with my dad as my official photographer, and we sort of walked around New York for 3 days, doing about sort of 30 miles a day, and sort of wandering around all over New York, and he didn't even know really what he was taking photos of. I was just sort of pointing and going, I need that. So he'd take a photo of that, and then I'd sort of fill him in later as we were walking, sort of as to what he was actually taking photos of. So,
what's kind of your favourite New York film location, and then non-New York film location that you visited?
Well, the New York one, well, it would have to be the spot at Sutton Park Place where Manhattan was filmed, with the bench scene with Woody Allen and Diane Keaton. Even though there is no bench actually there, they brought their own bench there. But it's my wife's favourite film, and so I proposed there, and we got engaged here. So for sentimental reasons, it has to be that one, I think.
Absolutely.
And non-New York film location, one that I would love to visit would probably be like in Tunisia, probably like the sort of Tatooine, sort of Luke's homestead sort of thing with the dual sunsets. Somewhere like that would be a great place to visit, I think.
Isn't that wasn't that controlled by ISIS just like a few years ago or something like that? I was reading.
It's probably been taken over. It's probably not the safest place to go to anymore, but back in the day, it would have been quite the place to go to, I think. So.
And it's been quite crazy to think in like the past few years, like all these different film and TV locations that have been kind of coming to the UK. Could you ever sort of see yourself maybe writing a book based in sort of UK ones? Obviously Star Wars is filming here now, Avengers, Harry Potter. It seems to be kind of a go-to place.
Yeah, no, I think Edinburgh is one place that I have thought about. Scotland in general, you could do a great one on Scotland, but Edinburgh in particular. Went down for some of the filming of Avengers Infinity War, so I think once that comes out and actually see what finally makes it into the film, I might do that next year as a project as well.
Absolutely. Well, one director who has yet to film kind of in the UK as far as I'm aware, well, I suppose out with some sort of film studios here, is kind of Duncan Jones. So this is why we're kind of all kind of brought together today, is obviously his new movie Mute will be out on Friday. So we've wanted to kind of make this a bit of a two-parter, the films of Duncan Jones, and then we'll be back again next week with a review of Mute. So none of my fellow nerd party have watched many of his films or is as excited about Mute as me. So naturally I've got you here today, Dallas, for the show. So kind of when you think of Duncan Jones, what comes to mind? Is it movies like Moon, or is it even just sort of his online personality? Because he seems like one of the most nice, genuine people out there.
He is, yeah. I was first introduced to him through Moon, I think, when we had it at the Belmont, and I think when I first saw it, I didn't actually realise that Duncan Jones was who he was as in sort of David Bowie's son. It was more just, I sort of found out all that afterwards, after researching, after seeing the film and wanting to know more about this director. And then actually that's when I found out that he actually lived in Aberdeen for a couple of years as well. When David Bowie was off touring or something, he actually stayed with someone in Aberdeen. So he's got a Scottish connection, which is nice. And he loves a buttery or a rowie.
Absolutely.
It depends, I think, where you're from and how you actually say it, whether it's a buttery or a rowie. But he loves both of them. So so it was like one of like the Belmont's, like the staff's favourite films of 2009 when it came out, and I was just completely blown away and couldn't actually believe that it was like a feature film from a debut filmmaker, because it was just so complete and polished. And I think what I loved about it most was sort of the old school feel that was sort of harking back to sort of like the sci-fi films of the sort of 70s and 80s. It had practical sets, there was use of model work and stuff like that, and limited use of CG. Well, although technically I suppose we will be going into details on the film, so we will be going into a lot of spoiler detail. But it's safe to say, I guess, there was a lot of CG used during the second half of the film when Sam meets the other Sam. But I just loved the whole sort of feel of it and the story of it as well. Yeah,
like I had a sort of almost an opposite one to you, whereas like I was very much aware that he was David Bowie's son because I saw Moon kind kind of opening day. But before then, I'd been along to when the Edinburgh Film Festival was on. They had Mark Kermode's podcast came here, and they had him as one of the guests. And it was mentioned within about 1 minute that he was David Bowie's son, and like there was a lot of articles kind of coming out of this film that had aired in Edinburgh, and it was David Bowie's son, and I was almost annoyed, just let the guy have his own film. We don't need to know he's David Bowie's son. It felt like this novelty thing to constantly mention it. And it was just one of those ones. I saw the movie and I was just blown away straight away by it. It was one of these movies that it's like almost in a cinema for a week and then gone the next, and then you feel like you're just constantly telling people you've got to see this movie or sharing around the DVD. And I just thought it was fantastic. And as you say, he's got that Aberdeen connection. I remembered my dad telling me one day going, oh, it was my co-worker's aunt that looked after him when he was living in Aberdeen, and he was like, I don't know if you'll know this guy, but he was like David Bowie's son. I was like, oh yeah, I know the guy. I've met him like a couple of times at some film things, and it's one of my favourite films. And he was like, oh, all right. He thought it was more like it's David Bowie's son that's the kind of the novelty of this story. It's like, no, this guy's a brilliant director.
Yeah, no, I think he was absolutely deserving of the win of the best debut at the BAFTAs.
Yes,
which is on tonight, and you could see in his speech that he got really emotional about it, and he said that he'd struggled for a while of knowing what to do with his life, and he'd found something that he really loved doing. And I can understand why he changed his name to Duncan Jones. Obviously he wanted to do it to be able to make it on his own and not have to worry about the sort of nepotism sort of angle of it, although I guess they did have sort of Trudy Styler was one of the producers on it, so there may have been a couple of favours pulled in to get the financing for the film, but after that, I mean, he's been able to carve his own path and do his own thing as well, which is good.
So when you were obviously kind of touched upon that, you saw it there when it was getting screened at the Bellman, what was your kind of initial reaction when you saw this movie, and what did you know about it kind of going in?
I don't think I knew much about it before going in, apart from it had a really good sort of marketing campaign, and the fact that we got a lot of the posters and the t-shirts. The staff, if you've ever worked in a cinema at any point, people will know that if the staff get a t-shirt, they will be much more keen to promote a film and stuff like that, so they always love a freebie.
Yeah,
and
of
so
course.
those great t-shirts on it had it was black with the sort of the diametric circles with the lone image of Sam Rockwell in the front, so that was what put it to the front of people's minds. And I think it's just when it came out, everyone was just completely blown away with the story and Sam Rockwell's performance, and it certainly got a great word of mouth in Aberdeen. It did play for, like it was, you say, it was a small film, so it didn't get a huge run on release, but it's certainly one that sort of picked up on DVD and on home video afterwards as well.
Because obviously, like, you're very much the same as me. Like, we both have a Moon film poster on our wall. What is it about kind of Moon that, we all see so many movies a year, films that we think are fantastic, 5 out of 5, but what was it about Moon perhaps for you that got it from this is a great film to a film where, you've got it on your wall?
Well, for a film to make it onto my wall, it has to have a stunning design on the poster, which it does, but also it has to have like a personal connection. So I've also got, in the other rooms, I've got Blade Runner and stuff like that. So it's sort of, actually, I do quite a few sci-fi posters on the walls. Sci-fi is one of my favourite genres, and it was just something about the realness of it that it felt like it could be real. And I think it was probably ultimately Sam Rockwell's central performance that won it over for me. I just thought he was absolutely sensational, and this was a guy who I hadn't seen much of, although actually maybe more that I hadn't realised I had seen much of, because it wasn't until sort of going back that I realised I'd actually seen him in Galaxy Quest.
Yes.
His characters in Galaxy Quest, this guy, the sort of crewman with no name who's worried about, what's going to happen to him, and then also I hadn't realised he was in The Green Mile is the psychotic cellmate as well. So, I mean, he'd completely gone under the radar, which I guess just shows how great an actor he is, that he's able to become a chameleon and move from role to role. But I was just absolutely stunned at how good he was. And as Duncan Jones sort of had on Twitter and whatever, he absolutely should have been nominated for an Oscar that year. I sort of checked up in advance of the podcast to find out who had been nominated that year. And it was, I think Jeff Bridges won for Crazy Heart, when he should have actually won the year before for True Grit. And then Colin Firth was nominated for a Single Man, which I agree with. He should have actually won for a Single Man rather than The King's Speech, but that's just me. And then there was George Clooney for Up in the Air, Morgan Freeman for Invictus, and Jeremy Renner for Hurt Locker. And for me, Sam Rockwell should absolutely make that list.
Absolutely. Like, the idea that sci-fi movies get anything beyond sort of the token gestures is always kind of like, you're always watching, you think, oh my god, this is a brilliant performance. Well, it'll probably get a technical nomination at most, but I always think the fact that even though Rockwell didn't get nominated, the fact that like Duncan Jones got nominated and won, you know, for best kind of debut as a writer, director, producer, like that kind of gives it that validation that kind of people that go to see movies and care about this sort of attention to detail saw the movie and appreciated it. It was sort of, it was maybe sort of a critic's favourite. For those who saw it, they fell in love with it, and for those who hadn't, it was a movie that they'll eventually fall in love with, I think.
Yeah, because I think if I'm right in thinking, Sigourney Weaver for Alien's the only person who's been nominated for a sci-fi.
Yeah, I can't think of any other off the top of my head.
It is something that people just don't seem to, you know, credit as much as others. But I mean, in some ways, you know, people say comedy's harder than drama and stuff like that. But for sci-fi, to basically if you've got something like a film like this and be able to convincingly create a world and stuff like that, surely that's more difficult than, you know, doing something where someone's just set in an everyday world that everyone already knows and stuff like that. To convincingly portray a man on the edge of space who's faced literally with, I guess, himself. Then I thought it was just a superb performance.
When with like the movie itself, like we've touched upon, kind of like that, it's this little bit of use of CGI and sort of like sets and models. With that, like I always think it just looks. Whenever I've seen it on a big screen, and it always seems to kind of get at least once a year here in Edinburgh. At least it gets shown as some sort of science festival movie, or I think I saw it as a psychology season where it was all about, you know, different things and threads. And I think with this, like whenever you see it on a big screen, it still stands the test of time that perhaps other movies are from 2009 with CGI, they've become a bit dated, or you see the lines. With this, it truly kind of stands the test of time, and it feels very much in the mold of those 70s and 80s sci-fi movies that we all love.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think for science fiction films, it's definitely computer-generated effects and haircuts that will age a film more than anything else. Star Wars, whatever, I mean, the original Star Wars A New Hope, I mean, those effects still stand up. Jurassic Park, those effects still stand up, but, you know, sometimes the haircuts will date a film as to when it was actually shot. But this one, yeah, it's like the models and stuff, the model work is fantastic, and it does, yeah, remind me of like Silent Running and Alien, which use the practical sets and sort of following on from the original Star Wars, they had that lived-in look for sci-fi. The worlds had been around for a long time. It wasn't all shiny, it wasn't all polished, it was sort of dirty and grimy and stuff like that, which sort of lends itself to the believability and plausibility of it as well. Because I think in Moon, I think Duncan Jones, I don't think he actually set a date on it. You can kind of work out when it is, but he doesn't explicitly put a date on it, so he, you know, not specifically aging the film in any way. And I think it's a wise choice. Yeah,
it feels like it's close, but so kind of not too far away. Like the idea, like when you see like what little we do see of Earth is in the beginning, in this sort of montage where we see Earth's been affected by this kind of energy crisis, and you look around and think, well, those kind of images do feel kind of pulled from today's headlines, but then it's just the technology where you think you've got a man living on the moon in a hub, you've got these tractors, as it were, kind of going around. It feels like, well, maybe it's just that little bit further, and as you say, like you couldn't pinpoint a date, but it has that sort of in the near future feel.
Yeah, and I think they did screen it for NASA or a couple of different science companies, and they sort of came back saying, yeah, no, that'll kind of checks out. I think in terms of science fiction, it's closer to science fact than we might believe, and then apart from perhaps the cloning aspect of the film.
Yeah, like they talked about like that. He did like a Q&A after the NASA screening, and they were like, well, in the future you won't want to continue carrying everything with you, you'll want to use the resources on the moon to build things, and like someone actually in the crowd went out, we're actually working on something called Mooncrete, which is like a concrete that mixes the lunar rocks with ice water from the moon's polar cap. So it really did feel like it was, you know, like someone genuinely made this, not like a an unrealistic thing. It felt like, yeah, someone could have designed that just now and it felt like a good fit. And I think even kind of on a production side, like, it wasn't the biggest set on the planet, but like the way Duncan Jones used the camera, he makes it feel big. It feels like a real working station. You know, every nook and cranny of that set is used, and you're never looking going, oh man, they've just reused the same set here. Like, it really is such a great, confident use of direction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's got that sort of lived-in look, which sort of certainly helps, because I think one of the great things about the story is that it takes its time, and so the first sort of 20 minutes of the film is sort of getting to know Sam and get the layout of the base, going through the daily routine, seeing his life sort of unfold before there's any sort of major seismic shifts in the plot, and then because it starts off as a sort of study of sort of isolation and sort of madness, and this man who's been on his own for 3 years, and then he starts to sort of see things, and he's not really sure if it's in his head or if it's real and whatever, and so you think it's going one way, and then something happens, and then you're suddenly faced with a different reality, and even then it's sort of still slightly unsure as to what to believe until sort of 2/3 through the film, when it's made explicitly clear that Sam Bell is actually a clone, and he's actually not the original Sam, and the original Sam's been on Earth for around about 15 years now.
Did you expect that or know that going in, that there would be another Sam Bell? What was your reaction to that sort of twist? I suppose it's hard to describe it as a twist as it kind of comes up so early. Were you kind of caught off guard by that, or what was your thoughts?
I think I was. I can't remember actually. I should have watched the original trailer before this podcast to find out how they actually sold it, but at the start I was still kind of unsure as to whether it was maybe in his head or there was like a time travel element or something like that. I wasn't entirely sure. I thought maybe that the cloning thing might have been too neat or whatever, but actually I think it worked perfectly for the story and what it means sort of to be Sam and what it means to be human, and because they all believe, the individual ones all believe that they are the real Sam Bell, and because since they've got his memories and stuff like that, that makes them Sam, and then you get into the whole sort of murky waters of the ethics of cloning and stuff like that, and I think it worked perfectly for that.
Do you for me, if I remember the trailer correctly, I think it was very much focused on the isolation aspect. Like, they very much keep, like, there's these two Sam Bells hidden up their sleeve, as far as I remember, because it's been a wee while since I've watched it, but I remember going into the film myself and being like, when it was like the two, I was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, the idea that they would use clones, like, you see like this base and it's all about using natural resources. Well, you know, fuel is probably one of the biggest resources, so if every 3 years even you've got someone coming from Earth to the moon just for that one person, it seems more sense to just make sure you've got everyone up there kind of first and early doors.
Yeah, as they say, it's good to have a couple of spares hanging around the base just in case anything happens. So it makes perfect sense. But of course, Sam 1 and Sam 2 are not the only.
Absolutely.
They do have assistance from Gertie, the artificial intelligence on the base as well. So.
What do you think of Gertie? I mean, it's slightly tinged now based on the current climate, but what do you think of Gertie as a character?
Gertie as a character, I think, is fantastic. And I mean, there's an obvious comparison. As soon as you start watching, you have HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey in your head. Although with added emoticons this time around, which they didn't have in the 60s. But, you know, I watched it back last week, and for me, Kevin Spacey's performance is pitch perfect, and he plays it in such a way that you're never entirely sure if Gertie is on Sam's side or is on the evil corporation side, and I think he does it great. I managed to push everything out of my head for the sort of 90 minutes that I was watching the film, and I've managed to separate the man from the performance in this respect, and it certainly didn't tinge my viewing of the film, which I still think is fantastic, but that's a whole sort of other debate to have. But for me, I thought voice-wise he was the perfect choice for it.
I think I remembered like having a debate with one of my friends and listeners of the show where it was like, I remember seeing Gertie and I was like, oh, I think he's a bit creepy, and she was like, no, he is genuinely such a lovely character that, as you're saying, like, there's that idea that, oh, is he working for the man or is he willing to work for Sam? But like, he's kind of, you know, at the beginning he's doing sort of his job, but then when things start to unfold with these two Sam Bells, like, he very much is on the side of these characters, and he does his best to make sure that they really kind of get out the best way possible. You know, he's willing to wipe his memory, and there's that scene where Sam's breaking into the computer and you're aware that Gertie is moving in, and you're like, oh no, he's going to kill him, like it's the evil robot. But then in reality he just inserts the password so that Sam can actually find out the truth. And it's that caring side, and it's just when you see those little faces, the smiles, the little tears, it really was sort of the Emoji Movie before the Emoji Movie kind of came along.
Yeah, there's sort of like it was almost like the original Wall-E or something, and there's a scene where like the original Sam's breaking down and you just sort of see Gertie's sort of robot arm sort of coming in gently, sort of tap him on the shoulder, like to sort of say, it's going to be okay, Sam, and stuff like that. So there's points like that, and then there's like the one where the Sam 2, I think I'll have to refer to them as Sam 1 and Sam 2 from now on, but Sam 2, just before when he shuts down Gertie to reboot, he sort of like takes a little kick me poster off the back of him for the next Sam as well. So there's like little touches like that which are really nice. Yeah,
and I think for me, like, one of the main characters in the movie is Clint Mansell's score. I think it's definitely one of the best soundtracks in probably many a recent year, and I that's another one I think was snubbed by the Oscars. What did you think of Clint Mansell's work? I know we've both heard it live.
Hearing that live was just fantastic, and for me, the score is such an important element of the film. I mean, the two tracks which I love the most is like the first one is a sort of Welcome to Lunar Industries one, which sets the scene and has a sort of standard sort of 2-note piano bit, and then, but for me, there's the really sort of heart-tugging sort of scene. I think the track is called Memories Someone Will Never Know, and it's the one that plays when Sam 1 is making the video call to Earth. And it's such a moving piece of music, and it sort of ends with sort of Sam sat in the rover, and there's a shot of the rover on the moon sort of looking at the Earth, and it's just sort of such a lonely, isolating shot, and it's just the score is just simply superb at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's Clint Mansell. I think that was my first real introduction to him after maybe Requiem for a Dream, and I just thought it was such a fantastic score, and especially like live, the Welcome to Lunar Industry score. It's that lovely little beat, you know, the guitar, the drums, and just sort of the classical musical pieces. I think it's such a great score, and I can't pull the two apart. You know, I think Moon is a fantastic film, but this score actually adds to the greatness of it. And you know, I think, yeah, absolutely one of my favourite scores, and definitely a go-to for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's one of those scores that you can play sort of just doing anything else, and just sort of it'll instantly bring you back to watching, to having the film in your mind as well. But of course, it's not the only sort of music that is in the film. There are sort of two tracks which play. You've got Walking on Sunshine, which is played at one point, which apparently was Duncan Jones's dig at Sunshine, Danny Boyle Sunshine, which was kind of at the same time. And then there's the Chesney Hawks is the one and only, which has now become his signature trademark move, which we believe he said will appear in Mute as well. But of course, the great thing about Chesney Hawks is when you first hear it, you're like, sort of cheesy, sort of course, because he's the one and only on the bass. But then, of course, it takes on the second meaning sort of halfway through when you realise what's going on as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fantastic, and I'm curious as well. Like, you know, people that are listening won't be able to see it, but you've got the Sam Bell T-shirt on. What's your take on the costumes and the outfits? And, you know, what is it about this movie, for example, that's inspired people like, you know, Last Exit to Nowhere, Dark Bunny, that are creating these T-shirts and making it to be, you know, why does the costumes resonate, perhaps?
It's funny that you should ask that, because I did write an article for Clothes on Film.
And we will put that in the show notes as well so people can read it.
Exactly. So yeah, I did an article which was looking at the costume design of the film, and in particular the Wake Me When It's Quitting Time t-shirt, which you see for about like 2 seconds at the start of the film when he's on a treadmill, and it's sort of like saying, at that point, the original Sam is 2 weeks out from sort of the end of his contract, so he's basically sort of wake me when it's quitting time, so he's got 2 weeks until he's out. But then, of course, when they go downstairs and find the stack of clones, you actually see that with one of the clones which is still in hibernation, and wake me when it's quitting time essentially now means wake up a new clone when the previous one has come to the end of his contract. And since we're in sort of spoiler mode, it's sort of hinted that the clones have a limited lifespan, whether they're either designed that way or... I did hear a theory recently that was basically there was maybe sort of a radiation sort of thing on the base, which is leading them to becoming ill. Apparently a lot of Sam's sort of ailments, such as headaches and sort of loss of weight and sort of propensity to bleed and stuff like that, are similar to sort of radiation poisoning. But Sam 1, as you go through, his clothes get a lot looser and sort of baggier to sort of show that he's sort of not in as great shape, whereas the Sam 2 is in his new flight suit and he's sort of very sort of lean and mean and looking great. And a lot of the patches on the Sarang jumpsuit as well, they also have sort of meanings. There's one patch in particular, it's got like 4 squares, 2 orange and 2 black, which is a replica of a patch that was on Bruce Dern's spacesuit in Silent Running. And a lot of the feel of all the costumes and the spacesuits are also very similar to Alien, in the fact it's a very sort of lived-in look, and it's sort of the sort of blue-collar workers who are doing a lot of this work up in space as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we'll be putting that into the show notes for people to kind of to read further. I mean, you've definitely given it a great plug there. I agree. I think the costumes as well. I think it resonates because it's, as you say, like it's not just like, especially for sci-fi fans like ourselves, whether it's Star Trek or whatever, the idea of 2 people or clones in space is quite common. It's the old thing, how do you tell people apart? And it's not just like, you know, you maybe give someone a goatee or someone not, but like the idea that, as you say perfectly, like the costumes sum up these characters so well. You know, you've got someone falling apart here, whereas the newly reactivated Sam clone, he looks like the kind of all-American trooper, whereas our kind of dying Sam Bell looks like he's really struggling, falling apart, looking a bit of a slouch. And yeah, the badges were something I never noticed until a few years ago, when I think there was a website that put up with all the different patches. You're like, the level of detail and attention is why I think things like this movie it rewards those repeat viewings, and why people like me and you are talking about it nearly 10 years on from its release.
No, absolutely.
So is there anything else you want to talk about on with Moon before we dive into 2011?
Well, I think we've covered pretty much everything, although I should give a shout out to Robin Chalk, who was basically the guy on set who was playing the stand-in clone, because I was rewatching the film on my Chromebook and I paused the film, and apparently Chromebooks have this thing where basically Google will tell you who the actor is on screen. Uh-huh. And it was Sam Rockwell. It was coming up as Robin Chalk.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, Sam Rockwell's performance was fantastic, but obviously he was having to play off of someone, so Robin Chalk clearly gave a great performance and allowed Sam Rockwell to give the performance that he did. So, and possibly in no better scene than the scene with the ping pong.
Yes.
Because I watched that back, and I don't know how they did that scene, because the CGI is spotless, and when they're playing each other at ping pong, you can't tell where the join is, and that's a sign of very, very good CGI. Definitely.
Like, I mean, the film only had a budget of 10 million, so it's not like it could go like, oh, CGI is the answer to everything. Like, this is always where, people make their marks as a director, right? How can you make, this space movie for nothing, essentially? And I think, yeah, like moments like that are testament, because you don't see the joints, you don't see the things that perhaps, some people in a low budget movie, you can see those lines, whereas this, yeah, as you say, absolutely not. So, diving into kind of 2011, we got our next Duncan Jones movie. So this one was a slight different because he wasn't involved in the writing process of this one, but Jake Gyllenhaal starred in this movie, and he was the one that picked Duncan Jones to direct this movie after seeing Moon himself and champion Duncan Jones on the back of this one. So you mentioned earlier on we were both at this same convention of all places in London, opening weekend of Source Code. When did you see Source Code? What was your expectations going into a new Duncan Jones movie, and what was your thoughts perhaps coming out of it?
think I went to see it directly after the convention. I think I was meeting friends in London. I think we basically went to the cinema to see it straight afterwards, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great action film. It was the kind of film where you're basically thrown in straight in at the deep end, and the fact that you don't know what's going on and the characters don't know what's going on as well. And I thought it was obviously I'd sort of seen the trailers and stuff, and you had this sort of Groundhog Day sort of style vibe that so many more films seem to be doing these days. I mean, back in 2011, it was like, it felt like the first one to do it since Groundhog Day, but now you've got like Edge of Tomorrow, Happy Death Day, and there's another new romantic comedy out on Netflix, which I can't remember the
Oh yes, I don't remember the name, but it's got the guy from the, what's it called, Max and whatever Need Dates. I know the one, yeah.
Yeah, no, so I thought it was a great little action film.
Yeah, like for me, I caught it opening day, probably one day before you. I didn't go down to London till the first thing on Saturday morning, so I finished work on the Friday, popped along to see Source Code. I was really excited for this, to see, Duncan Jones and Jake Gyllenhaal, and it was immediately clear to me why Jake Gyllenhaal thought Duncan Jones would be good for this, because it's almost one of these movies where there's only a few locations. You've got a train, you've got an army base, and you've got some exterior shots kind of kicking around in Chicago. And with like Moon, it's clear that Duncan Jones can get a lot out of a small, tight location. He can make multiple scenes in small locations seem interesting each and every time. And with this, like, it's this repeating storyline. Every 8 minutes he goes back in time. And you never sort of think, I'm a bit bored of this train now, or I've seen this already. And he makes that good use of all these different little locations, nooks and crannies, exploring a little bit different part of the train each time. And I thought it was so clear, and it had the same sort of trend again with Moon, that it was these character moments that are filling up this, intimate action movie adventure. And I thought, excellent. I thought it was perfect sense for me why he was involved.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Yeah, because Jake Gyllenhaal is similar to sort of Sam Rockwell, and he's not your typical sort of leading man. Well, he certainly wasn't back then. It was quite an interesting choice that you don't go with someone who, because I guess if you're putting the consciousness of someone into someone else's body to relive this 8 minutes to try and figure out who bombed the train, a studio could have gone with an all-action hero or something like that. So to go with someone like Jake Gyllenhaal was a great choice. And yeah, he sort of really draws out sort of different aspects and the different styles. Every time he's sort of going back, you've got a slightly different viewpoint and stuff like that. And I thought it was a great film. And yeah, it's sort of the little character moments, because with only 8 minutes, even though every time he goes back it's not precisely 8 minutes because different things happen every time, you still manage to get a lot of character development in a very short space of time, and that's something that he's very good at. And
the movie itself isn't long, it's just shy of 90 minutes as well, so it's not one of these sci-fi movies where it's like it's every 15 minutes so they can really squeeze everything out. It is that really tight movie. It feels very much like it takes what worked in Moon and just kind of amplifies it a bit. It seems like a perfect project, sort of a stepping stone from Moon into sort of Hollywood cinema, and sort of he feels very much like a safe bet to make a movie like this. For me as well, I thought with it as well, like, it wasn't so much like you come away of thinking, that like I've found the plot of him trying to hunt down this character that's got a bomb on a train. Like, I think in the wrong hands that would have perhaps been the main focus, like we've got to find out who's the bomber and going through all these different people, whereas I think it focuses rightly on just like him forming this relationship and sort of coming to terms with who actually is he and what's his role, how did he become involved in this Source Code project. And that's the more exciting story than, right, who's got the bomb, we've got to get it off the train, that we've seen so many times before, and we've seen just recently again in a movie like The Commuter.
The Commuter, which also stars Vera Farmiga,
yes,
a woman telling a man basically to find a mysterious passenger on a commuter train. So she's got a very niche genre.
Yes.
Box of films like that. So, but yeah, no, you're right. What was good about the film is the fact that it was essentially a two-part mystery, and so you've got Jake Gyllenhaal as a man trying to find who bombed the train, but you've also got this other storyline of he doesn't know why he's involved in this program, and he's trying to find out what's happened to him. He was originally a helicopter pilot over in Afghanistan, and suddenly he's back stateside as part of this source code program being implanted into the situation, and he's then trying to find out answers to his storyline within the second storyline. And of course there's this whole sort of thing, I think it's like Jeffrey Wright's character tells him, the source code, it's quantum physics, parabolic calculus, basically throwing really long words at people to basically try and explain why these things are happening. It's sort of like the bit in Austin Powers where they're talking about time travel and he says, oh no, I've gone cross-eyed and stuff like that. So it's basically, don't worry about why this is happening. Just believe that this is the world that's set up. It can happen, and just go with the story.
Yeah, I was the same. Like, I rewatched it this morning. I was like, still trying to get at the timeline, going, wait, how did this alternative reality kind of kick in and stuff like that? I don't think the plot perhaps makes the most sense, but again, with sort of sci-fi, we've seen these tropes a lot of times, and we accept like time travel. Well, as long as the story is interesting enough and it doesn't make me think too much about the holes, then I'll go along with it.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a few sort of plot holes, but basically it's about J. Jonah trying to discover. It's like they say that what happens within the source code stays within the source code, but there's this element that it could be creating parallel realities every time it goes back in. But I mean, there was a couple of things which, with the benefit of hindsight, are quite funny. I mean, I remember the line, it's like, ask J. Jonah in 2011 asking someone if they have internet on their phone.
Yes.
And then also using Bing as a search engine, which I believe is Amazing Spider-Man 2 is the only other film to basically use that on screen as a search engine. So Bing clearly don't have the same marketing budget that Google or Yahoo do.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little thing. That's perhaps, we were talking about hair sometimes dates things. I think it's people's attitudes towards the internet which dates things sometimes as well. Like when you hear like dial-up and movies like You've Got Mail, it's so easy to go up the internet on a phone, and I think that's definitely a telltale sign. And obviously this movie was incredibly well reviewed, and there was talk that it was going to be turned into a TV series, and then there's talk that there's going to be a sequel in the making. Would that be something you'd be interested in seeing?
I think there's definitely a lot of scope for exploring the idea further. For me, I thought maybe the film was almost perhaps too short, and for me, I didn't think there was almost enough time spent within the sort of time loop. The sort of the who bombing the train sort of storyline was almost sort of wrapped up almost too quickly. I think I did sort of make a note. I think it's around about 8 or 9 times you see him go within the loop. And one of the great things about Groundhog Day, sort of the first one to do that sort of thing, is you actually got to see sort of Bill Murray's sort of struggle with repeating the same day again. And it starts off when he does a lot of things for fun, and then it goes into the sort of despair and then sort of general acceptance of it before moving on to, well, I might as well just try and create the one perfect day. I thought there maybe could have been a bit more sort of time spent within the time loop, but I guess it's sort of added in the fact that you've got more time sort of exploring sort of Coulter Stevens' story, which sort of led on to, for me, one of the greatest moments in the film, which is something that's also sort of becoming a bit of a Duncan Jones sort of a trope, which is a sort of having heartbreaking phone calls with people even though you're not really that person. Mm-hmm. So it's the moment when Jake Gyllenhaal, as Sean Fentress, calls Coulter Stevens' dad to tell him sort of what's happened to him. And the cameo is the voice on the end of the phone is Scott Bakula from Quantum Leap, and he even gets to do the "oh boy" sort of catchphrase, which is a nice sort of tie into this whole sort of time travel sort of loop as well.
And I always think that's definitely a Duncan Jones choice as well. That it could have it's a thankless task. It's someone that's on the other end of a line a few times, and I think with this, like you could imagine, especially with the sense of humour that we know he has, like going, well, it's obviously got to be Scott Bakula. Get that guy on and pay him whatever he wants to just do some voice work. I think it was such a cool touch. Like I missed it the first time, and then the second time was like, yeah, that's Scott Bakula on the other end of the line.
Yeah, no, I thought the two of them, I thought Jake Gyllenhaal managed to get a lot of emotion into that phone call as well.
It was quite good rewatching it this morning. Like, I was in Chicago last year, and then seeing sort of the scenes and the cloud gate. You know, when I went to kind of Millennium Park last year, you know, it's this big tourist spot. But for me, it was like, oh, look, it's the thing from Source Code, and it was like that. I think for many a film fan, that's what they associate the cloud gate with, is this movie.
Oh no, I think if I ever go to Chicago and I go to that spot, then that's all I'll be thinking, yeah.
Yeah, definitely, because pretty much the whole entire movie was filmed in kind of Quebec, Canada. The only real sort of scenes filmed in Chicago were some exteriors and just this one scene in the Millennium Park. So yeah, it's definitely a really good. I think it's become quite a popular movie, and especially at a budget of 32 million, it made 147 at the box office. You know, it's may not be the kind of money we're seeing in Marvel movies or whatever, but it's a successful amount. You know, sci-fi movies, making back its money and more. Like, I think Duncan Jones is at his best when he's got a small budget, and it's like, right, go be creative with that. And I think he certainly did that with this movie.
Absolutely, and I guess we should sort of talk about the ending. It'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on the final ending, where basically he's managed to save the day. The bomb's not gone off, and he's managed to stay within the source code, and it seems like a happy ending, but essentially his consciousness has now taken over someone else's body.
Yes.
He's essentially killed the person who was within that body, and he's now pretending to be Sean Fentress. Yeah,
it's problematic, I think, because I was watching it today and I was like rewatching it thinking, wait a second, what happened to the teacher? He's probably just like this normal guy with family, everything like that, just kicking about, and it's like, no, he's gone now. He won't even know where his family lives or if he's got a house. We know he's single because he's got a bit of a relationship going on with Christina. But you're like, maybe he's a father that's separated, or all these different things. Like, it's very problematic. But I suppose it's that thing with time travel. You just sort of kind of have to go with it. But if this was any other sci-fi movie, perhaps that would be the plot. Like, this time-traveling soldier has inhabited my body, how do I get it back? It's very problematic.
It could be, maybe, I guess that could be the sequel, where maybe Sean Fentress is in maybe it's like a sort of Being John Malkovich or Get Out. He's in like the sunken place.
Yes. And it's not like even like this guy's a bad guy or anything like that. We're just like, he's just someone that's inhabited his body, and he just seems to be just like quite happy to now go on a date with it, or there's no chance to, it's nice that he is this soldier that's lost his legs and so many other parts of his body, and now he's just like got a body back again, but it's at the expense of someone else that was completely unwitting, and it would just happen to be the same size and have the same brainwave as Jake Gyllenhaal's character.
So yeah, well, I mean, I thought it was a good sort of solid sort of 4-star action film, and yeah, no, I'd be happy if they ever decided to sort of explore that world further in a TV series. I think it would work really well as a sort of 30-minute, sort of 40-minute TV series.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's things like that. You can imagine it, no doubt. It seems like so many shows are now just kind of popping on to kind of Amazon, and things like Fargo, the success of that. I could easily imagine something like this happening and being on a streaming service. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I guess moving on from that, we're then talking about Warcraft: The Beginning.
Yes. So Warcraft: The Beginning, and at this stage Warcraft: The One and Only. Were you much of a like? Obviously, it was kind of announced quite early on, about 2 years after Source Code was released in 2013, that Duncan Jones would be making this movie. For folk like me and you, were maybe hoping it was going to be Mute, but it proved to be Warcraft. What was your reaction to this news that he was going to be taking on this video game franchise?
Well, I mean, ever since Moon, Duncan Jones has been one of those directors, similar to like Christopher Nolan, that basically I would go see anything that they do as close to the first day as possible. So I'll admit I've never played Warcraft. I didn't really know much about Warcraft beyond sort of this sort of South Park episode about Warcraft, and sort of something about a guy called Leroy Jenkins who runs into battle shouting Leroy or something. I don't know. But yeah, so I didn't know a huge amount of it. So I was quite interested to see what was I mean, I was kind of hoping that he might have sort of maybe gone into like maybe the sort of the Marvel sort of Star Wars universe, given his previous work in sort of sci-fi. But I was intrigued to see what was going on and see what he could do with it.
Yeah, I was the same. I'm the same as you. He is like a day one film fan for me at the moment, and I had no interest in Warcraft. Never played it. I'm not much of a video gamer. My opinion on it was very much thinking like, oh, it's that show that was brilliant. That was that game that was brilliantly parodied on South Park. So I wasn't excited. I was wanting to see him continue with an original movie, but at the same time, I remembered when a spot opened up on the latest Star Trek movie, and I was like, oh, I'd love Duncan Jones to do that, to go into that world. So I was kind of a bit, not the most enthused that this was going to be the movie, but I was going to go see it anyway. And then when it got to opening day, what did you think kind of going into the movie and then coming out?
I mean, I'd seen like a couple of trailers, so I kind of sort of could feel that it had, obviously, the biggest sort of comparisons. I mean, you can't really do a fantasy film these days without it being compared to Lord of the Rings. But for me, as a complete novice, I mean, I could follow the storyline. I mean, I managed to get a good idea of the world that he'd created, and I think one thing which I really appreciated was the fact that it wasn't in a similar way to Lord of the Rings, humans versus orcs. You actually got the two sides of the story, and you started off by introducing the orc characters, and the one played by Toby Kebbell, and then you then introduced the humans later, and it was also sort of like a dual sort of perspective, which I thought was good. I thought for introducing the world, I thought he did a good job.
Yeah, for me, it wasn't a film I came out of too excited with. I struggled with it a bit. That I'm a fan of fantasy, but not in any sort of great degree. And it was just one of these movies that I thought the soundtrack was really good. See, when I heard that, like the logos coming up and that beating, I thought, oh, I'm quite into this. But I just sort of struggled to get into any of the characters, and even kind of having only just revisited it yesterday, I remember the orc, the big kind of guy he's struggling to be a father in this kind of world, I thought was quite interesting. But it just never clicked with me into a movie where I was thinking like, yeah, I'm all on board with this. And some of the human performances just felt a little bit stilted, and I find fantasy sometimes a bit tedious when it kind of goes into fantasy kind of slang. Everyone's just talking in fantasy and genre terms, and I sort of disconnect a bit from that. But it was just a movie that I just wasn't a fan of, and I thought Duncan Jones did well with what he had, but I think perhaps making this movie on maybe a more limited budget, I think he would have been able to have done perhaps a bit more and maybe have been a bit more creative. Whereas I think with this, when you have a lot of money, it's so easy then to go, right, we've got to have this character, we've got to have this plot line, and probably appease the fans of the game.
Yeah, no, I think that probably is with a franchise or sort of game like this, where you've got this built-in fan base, that there's got to be a lot of sort of making sure you hit certain marks and stuff like that. And also, I think for me, it was too short. This film is actually just about under 2 hours, which, for a science fiction sort of fantasy epic is actually really short. And also, for the first one in setting up the universe, I think it could have done a lot more. But I think I'd be interested to know who decided to call it Warcraft The Beginning, in deciding that before the film was released, it was going to start off this franchise, which, as we've seen in the last couple of years with the Dark Universe, which has stalled completely, and the DC Extended Universe, never try to run before you can walk. Mm-hmm. Make sure that your first one is successful, lands, finds an audience, and then builds towards sequels and stuff like that. That's an all too common problem these days, and it's certainly, I don't think, any sort of fault of Duncan Jones. He's tried to do the best movie that he can within the circumstances. I mean, there is some good things in it. I think, for me, one of the most interesting aspects was Paula Patton's character, the sort of orc-human hybrid. And I've got it down here, I've written it down, it's Garona, not Gamora.
Yes.
Sort of sci-fi fantasy woman in the last couple of years. Because I thought she had a really good, interesting arc, in the fact that, as in most sci-fi films, she was against the grain, and that she starts off in like one of those fur bikinis from like the sort of a Cal Welch sort of Planet of the 8 Days. But as the film progresses, she actually gets more and more clothing as the film goes on. She gets more and more armor and becomes more of a proper character within her own right. And I really like the depiction of that female character within the film, which I thought was different to some of the other sort of fantasy epics that you get these days.
Yeah, I thought her character line that, you know, she wants to join forces, bring people together, but how she kind of almost has to bring pieces, the slaying of this king, and, you know, the fact that he goes willingly, and then it almost sounds like it could have been quite an exciting sequel, that, you know, she's now this outcast, you know, the humans don't trust her, they're not aware of this scheme that they had together, and then, you know, the film ends, and then we have this little, almost straight away we go into this little kind of scene where we see the baby kind of come up onto the shore, so it promises things to come. And I mean, it is possible that we might get a sequel to Warcraft. I wouldn't expect it to be a Duncan Jones one, but, you know, the film, you know, as we kind of touched on, we had a bit of a mixed reaction to it. You know, mixed reaction at the box office. You know, got 24 million in its opening weekend in America, then dropped off by 70%. But outside of the USA, you know, it opened huge in Russia, Ukraine, Germany, and China. It broke all the records there. Pretty much it recouped all its money and more over there. You know, I think it's got a theme park to Warcraft there. So I wouldn't be surprised if they make another kind of Warcraft movie with a smaller budget, based on the fact that it was so popular all across the world, bar perhaps the UK and America.
Yeah, no, I was doing some searching for the box office figures, and apparently it did end up grossing $433 million worldwide, which apparently is the highest grossing video game adaptation, which is not bad for a film which on its opening weekend everyone had slated and written off as not going to do very well. So I mean, it's got legs and it has made money, and yeah, I expect you probably could get a sequel out of it somewhere, because I mean, yeah, certainly with the China box office propping it up, there's definitely scope for further exploration in the world. And just if anything else to find out, one thing I would love to know about the movie is the Glenn Close cameo. Where did that come from?
I never realised the Glenn Close cameo in the movie. You've surprised me there.
Yeah, she's the one. She's like a mystical wizard witch thing in sort of a black sort of cloud. When the young mage who's in Pride goes to see the wizards living in the castle in the sky in the clouds, seeing this sort of stuff, you kind of realise how silly it is. But yeah, no, she was that character, and I was just like, that's Glenn Close. How did that happen?
So when you we kind of look at wrapping this up, where do you think Warcraft? How do you think Warcraft kind of compares with sort of Source Code and Moon? And I don't mean that in sort of terms of quality, but do you see much of like the traits that we've seen perhaps in Moon, Source Code, and perhaps we kind of almost can pull from the Moon, the Mute trailer? Do you think Warcraft is just sort of an anomaly in his collection of movies, or do you think it could be a shape of things to come with his work, kind of bigger, more expansive universes, or do you think it will go back to perhaps the smaller worlds of Source Code and Moon when we get Mute?
I think I certainly love it when he works on a smaller budget, and I'm really looking forward to Mute because it's him working on his own story again, which is one of the reasons why I love Moon so much. It was such a personal sort of tale. I mean, there is the odd flash in Warcraft of, you can see it, unfortunately the main sort of Duncan Jones trope, the Chesney Hawks,
yes,
was sadly moved to a deleted scene, but it actually features Chesney Hawks playing the one and only on a lute in a village pub. So unfortunately we didn't get to see that on the big screen, but you could still tell that there was the odd flash of humour and stuff like that. There's the bit where like the mage sort of turns someone into a sheep and stuff like that, and there's a few sort of hints within a few of the battles and stuff like that. You can sort of see sort of a little playfulness, which is something that he brought to Source Code as well, which at times could have been a very sort of serious sort of plot-driven film, but he manages to work a sort of playfulness and humour into the situations, which maybe don't always have it.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's definitely those little humorous traits, but I just feel that with it being, you know, this video game franchise, it's just appealing to so many people, and we can pull those little moments of Duncan Jones out, but ultimately it's a movie for perhaps kind of fans of Warcraft as opposed to kind of fans of a filmmaker like Duncan Jones that go along to see his films for certain things. But I think the fact that he's gone on to do something like Mute next has me just so excited. You know, it could be so easy to go on to another big studio budget movie, but the fact that he's now almost maybe made Warcraft as a film for them, now it's a film for him, and I'm really excited to see, you know, Duncan Jones take on a futuristic Berlin. I think based on the trailers, you know, I don't want to go too much into Mute before next week, but I think it promises to be a very exciting movie for fans of his.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, he's been teasing it for the sort of last 10 years, so I mean, he's called it a sort of a spiritual sequel to Moon, and he sort of referenced sort of Blade Runner and Casablanca, which is basically two of my top 10 films of all time, so I'm very excited to see what he's managed to do. And I mean, I was there when the trailer dropped for Paul Rudd's Mustache Alone.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there was two Paul Rudd trailers on the day, Ant-Man and the Wasp and Mute, and I know which one I was most excited for come afterwards. So I'm so excited that you're going to be joining us again next week to discuss Mute. I can't think of a better person to discuss it with, so we'll be back again next week to discuss Mute. But if people wanted to kind of, after they've listened to this, wanted to kind of find your book, Dallas, you know, find your wonderfully written reviews and find you online, where could people kind of reach out to you?
Well, people could reach out to me on Twitter at Champ Celluloid, and I've got a blog called Championship Celluloid, and that's on Blogspot. And my book, Exterior New York City, Discover the Real New York on Location, is available from Amazon as well.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely check out his blog. Your reviews are fantastic, and I'm looking. We'll both be covering the Glasgow Film Festival, so I'm looking forward to seeing what films you pick and which ones you review. And we'll be doing a Mute podcast together, and we'll be reviewing the Glasgow Film Festival together soon. So people that listen to this podcast, you'll be a bit of a familiar voice by the middle of next month. So thank you once again for coming on. I really appreciate it. And anyone that's listened to this, like, get in touch with us. Let us know what you think of Duncan Jones's movies and what your expectations and anticipations are for Mute, and we'll be back again next week to discuss Mute. So thanks again for listening. Bye.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.